Hello again. I hope very much that you enjoyed the TV2 Denmark film, All That We Share, and to just point out what a wonderful resource that is actually for showing students what interculturalism is as opposed to multiculturalism. In this video, it would be good to talk a little bit about the theory around what we've been thinking about so far, including the speed meeting. So, just a few things to run past you for resources, and you'll find reading for these are available on the same website that the film is on, and here we go with one or two. First of all, I'd like to introduce you, if you don't know him already, to Professor Ted Cantle. 2012, a very interesting document by him. Professor Cantle was commissioned by the British government to investigate disturbances in the north of England and came to the conclusion, after investigating that very thoroughly, that indeed we have a problem with multiculturalism as a remedial step towards fully integrated and collaborative societies. What was the problem, he suggested, was that successive governments, including the UK government, had poured resources into minority communities so that they should quite rightly have access to the resources they are entitled to. But leaving it there is problematic. There's more to do. So what's happened is that, he suggests, we now have communities living side by side with fracture lines between them, not seeing that they are enmeshed in each other's destiny, in each other's fates, that they mediate what happens to each other. Instead, he suggests, interculturalism would have been, and still is, a much more mature and helpful option on the way to these collaborative and cooperative societies that we hope for, where people help each other and are not competing for resources. Zapata Barrero, 2013, examines that a little further, looking at intercultural policies. And he is very interesting on reminding us that each one of us as an individual, remember what we were saying about the walking universes that we each represent, that we are many, each of us representing many different cultures, and that is very true of our students too. So you may find a student who appears to be an ethnic minority student, or even a local white student here in the UK, who in fact shares a background very similar to an international student, may not have been introduced to English in the home and not had to speak English until they went to school for many sorts of reasons. Children taken abroad, married to European nationals in other countries beside the UK, a divorce occurs, and back they come to have their first encounter with English. All sorts of things could happen like that, and do every day. So our students, just like us, actually are walking in and out of different cultures all day long. And this is exactly what Zapata Barrero suggests is happening. We may not realize it. We may not even realize we're doing it ourselves. That we are a different person, as Labov suggests as well, depending on who we're talking to. A police officer, a partner, a child, grandchild. We are different all the time, and that is perfectly much as it should be. We are very complex individuals, and we fit with different codes to the different contexts and situations that we're talking to and talking in. And that is why interculturalism is so important. We share so much. And the film TV Denmark, that the TV Denmark have made, explains that very well. Moving on from Cantle and Zapata Barrero to Page Gould, Mendoza Denton and Trope, 2008. What an interesting study that they ran, which is very relevant to the speed meeting in your classrooms that you may want to do. Here's a little theory behind that then. They noticed in their university in California, California State University, that Latin American students and white local American students hardly mixed. And they discovered that when they interviewed Latin American students, that these students were anxious, very sensitive to racial prejudice. And they decided that they would set up meetings, paired meetings, between a Latino student and an American white local student. And they would set up a number of these pairs. And the pairs were set up between students who did not know each other. And these pairs would meet once a week for about 3 weeks. The educational psychologists behind this experiment designed sets of questions for these students to ask each other as a basis for conversation and dialogue. And each set of questions for each consecutive week invited students to disclose more and more about themselves of a personal nature. And they took samples of cortisol, that is to say, they took samples of saliva in which to measure cortisol, a stress hormone, from each student before the meeting. And they discovered that for the Latino students, the saliva samples showed that they were experiencing pretty high levels of stress hormone, in contrast to that which was found in these saliva samples of the American white students. However, as the meetings unfolded over the next 2 or 3 weeks, these stress hormone levels in the Latino students started to fall very significantly. And after this experiment, in interviews, they discovered that Latino students were far more willing to approach American students, to engage with them in dialogue and conversation, and also, just as importantly, or perhaps more so, the white American students were also thinking, why had they not been more involved in establishing friendships using their own initiative with Latino students? They would correct that in future. So looking all together at Cantle, at Zapato-Barrera, at Page Gould et al., we can see a pretty substantial argument for what you might be doing practically in the classroom, showing films like All That We Share, explaining to students how very unique they are, and getting them to speed meet. Very, very important in speed meeting, I would suggest, is also the fact that students are making eye contact with each other one-to-one. This is very much less threatening than having to engage with eye contact with a large group. And we're going to be talking about this eye contact quite a lot more because of its importance to compassionate noticing and being noticed and reading the group, including issues of how that helps stimulate oxytocin in the group. We'll think about that later on. And very shortly, we can see now that it's going to be very important to bring, in my view, Paul Gilbert on board to talk about the evolutionary aspects and the psychobiological aspects that underpin very much of what we've been thinking about so far in this series of videos on compassion in the classroom. Thank you very much.